Hey team, so in this video here, we're going to be thinking about ratios, starting with what is a ratio? Well, a ratio is simply a comparison of two values, two values. So go ahead and if you need to pause your notes, you can pause them and write that in. So when you have a comparison of two things, right? It could be dogs to cats, or it could be football players to baseball players, or whatever it is, right? You have these two values. So here we could call them quantity A and quantity B, right? A could be apples, B could be bananas, whatever you want it to be, or whatever your scenario presents. And these ratios can be written in three ways. So you can write it as A to B using what we call a colon. This right here, that's supposed to be an arrow, is a colon, right? It is a comparison symbol. You can also write it as A, come on, little buddy, A to B using the word to. You can also write it as A to B, writing it as a fraction, because all a fraction is a ratio, right? Or a ratio is really just a fraction. They're all comparisons, right? So however you write it, it is the same thing. It is a comparison of two things. So just like fractions, ratios should always be written in their simplest form, right? So you can remember to reduce, reduce, reduce. So when you are reducing or simplifying fractions, or in this case, simplifying ratios, you're going to find the least common the least common factor. I got ahead of myself with the denominator of the numerator and the denominator, right? So we can use diva essentially to help us divide both the top and the bottom by whatever that least common factor is, right? So if we wanted to simplify here, 16/30ths, we could say, well, of 16 and 30, I know I can divide each by 2. That is a 2. And when I do that, it's legal to divide them both by 2, so long as whatever we do to the top, we also do the same thing to the bottom. So we end up with 8 16, sorry, 15ths. So we have, that's a 15. We end up with 8 15ths, right? 30 cut in half is 15. So we have simplified our ratio. We could also write it, if we didn't want it in this fraction form, right? You could also write it as 8 to 15, or you could say 8 to 15. Either way, it's good practice to simplify. So here we're going to write each ratio in its simplest form, right? So first we want to know, well, what is the ratio? In this case, we have board games to video games. Well, how many? We have 9 board games to 3 video games. So we want to write it in its simplest form. So I might, just for familiarity's sake, write it as a 9, to 3 ratio. I can use my diva to simplify and say the greatest common factor of these is 3. So I'm going to divide each, essentially my diva, right? By the top and the bottom, each by 3, and I end up with 3 over 1. So we end up having a 3 to 1 ratio of board games. You want to be sure to label board games. I'm just going to do a VG to video games. Okay, so we have a 3 board game to 1 video game ratio. Technically speaking, you could also say you have a 1 video game to a 3 board game ratio, right? The numbers are the same, but since in our problem it started with board games first, we want to keep board games first and have video games follow. Finally, if we have a application here, we know that this recipe, right, calls for 3 bananas for every 6 cups of sugar. We want to know the ratio of bananas to sugar. So we set it up, banana to sugar, and then we have our mystery. So we can say it's a 3 banana to 6 sugar ratio. When we simplify, we can divide each by 3, and we end up with 1 to 2